Welcome on Texas Football. I'm Bobby Burton, joined by Gerry Hamilton. Jerry and I are going to talk a little Longhorn football recruiting and Ohio State's recruiting and the impact a game like this might have and where both teams have been recruiting from and how they've been recruiting for a number of years that have led them to the national semifinals. Obviously, Ohio State have been recruiting at a high level, Jerry, for a long time, including while Texas took the 2010s off.
Right.
Essentially, obviously, Ohio State won a national championship there with Urban Meyer. Now going for one with his successor, Ryan Day, here. And Jerry, the thing that I'm looking at is we look at team recruiting rankings. Let's just start there. Texas team recruiting rankings over 25, 24, 23, and 2022. Ranked number 1 in 2025, the class that just happened, 6 in 2024. 3 in 2023, and 5 in 2022. Really good run by Steve Sarkisian, right? But you look at the flip side in Ohio State and read off their team recruiting rankings of the last 4 years, and you see something that is extraordinarily similar to the Longhorns.
Yeah, I mean, both teams are essentially signing top 5 level classes each of the last 4 years. So the vast majority of the guys that'll be on the field that were recruited by these programs all came from top 5 classes. Ohio State was 4 this year, 5, 4, and 4. I mean, those could vary depending on the services you look at, but that's the gist of it. They've both signed on average about the number 4 ranked class the last 4 years. Texas maybe a smidge higher because the number 1 class, but they have signed similar talent in 4 straight classes. And I think that's the key we're getting at here. Before we get into the how they do it and the where, which is really interesting about this game from a recruiting standpoint. But Ohio State's been doing this for, 20 years in a row, essentially. I bet without going back, and I'm sure Ohio State fans will chime in the comments, I would guess the last 20 years, Ohio State's averaged about the number 4 ranked class in the country.
Yeah, they do a tremendous job. Let's talk about the where, because a lot of Texans will remember a Garrett Wilson. Or maybe a Jackson Smith and Jigba. Or a J.K. Dobbins. Yeah, somebody like that. They have a starter from Texas on their roster right now. Donovan Jackson, the big offensive lineman from down in Houston, starts for the Buckeyes. But that's not the only thing that Ohio State has done so successfully. They've created a footprint across the country, including the West Coast. But really, they've really recruited below the Mason-Dixon line extraordinarily well. And so whether that's Texas on into Florida with a guy like Jeremiah Smith or a number of other players.
Yeah, Ohio State's done the best job of a team outside the SEC region of recruiting Atlanta down south into Florida that I've seen. They have a number of players from the Atlanta area on this roster this year, guys you haven't even seen yet that were a 5-star like Eder Houston from Buford. They have done a great job recruiting Georgia. And prior in the Urban days, they really recruited Florida very well. They had the Bosa brothers, obviously, from St. Thomas Aquinas, and Urban Meyer being at Florida. He had connection there with the Bosa family. The Bosas were Ohio State people as well in that family tree. So that's a little different. But, I mean, look, they've recruited. They have a wide receiver, Bryson Rogers, from Wiregrass Ranch outside of Tampa, where Texas signed Grayson Littleton this year. They've recruited the I-4 corridor. They've had kids come out of IMG that either maybe came down from Ohio or other areas. So they have IMG on their roster as well. They have really done the best job outside of the SEC power teams of recruiting Georgia and Florida as 2 states combined. They have got a lot of really highly ranked prospects out of those areas, which stem from South Florida over to the Southwest corridor of Florida, and then up into the Atlanta area. They've done a really good job in those areas. And then, as you mentioned, Southern Cal, too. I mean, Sark wants to have a presence out there. Ohio State has Chris Henry committed from Mater Dei, who's one of the top 5 prospects in the country in 2026, already committed. They've offered Caden Dixon-White, who Texas also offered another receiver out there. They have a few guys from SoCal down to San Diego, up to L.A. on their roster and have offered Texas. Think about this, too, Bobby. Texas and Ohio State, and offering and targeting are a little bit different. They've offered a lot of the same prospects in 2026 already as well. There's some head-to-head battles in recruiting that are going on here that aren't just about Texas Ohio State coming in and signing Devin Sanchez and Riley Pettijohn. These are in the Southeast region. where, kids release like a Tyler Atkinson, a 5-star linebacker from Grayson, who has Texas and Ohio State in his top 6-7 schools, right? And along with Georgia and Tennessee and Auburn. So Ohio State's the one school that can come down from the Big Ten and get in any recruiting battle they want against the SEC big boys. And that means Texas and Ohio State may end up having some head-to-head battles coming up in the next 2 or 3 years.
You mentioned Sanchez and Pettijohn, obviously the two from this past year. Sanchez, the corner out of North Shore, Pettijohn, linebacker out of the Dallas area. Both highly sought by the Longhorns, end up choosing Ohio State. But, Jerry, I look at this and we see two teams with somewhat similar talent overall. I think that you may look at Ohio State at running back right now. They've got more talent. Texas, I mean, look, Quinn Ewers originally signed with Ohio State, right? I mean, Jeremiah Smith, tremendous player for them. Emeka Begwa, a great player as well. Then you have their defense, which is littered literally with highly ranked players as far away as from Hawaii.
Yes,
with, their group. But I'm looking at it and wondering what this means for the future of recruiting. A game like this might do, because I think Ohio State, man, look, they're heavily favored in this game. They come out and beat up the Longhorns on Friday night
in Dallas.
In Dallas, maybe that is a big deal to recruits. If it doesn't go that way, though, Texas might be able to start pushing back a little bit on what Ohio State's been able to do, not just in the Lone Star State, but across the South and even in Southern California, like you're talking about.
Well, and here's the thing: who opens up the season next year? Ohio State and Texas. They got 2 games coming, and for one of these teams, it's going to be back to back against the same team. Whoever loses Friday, they play the same team back to back. So there's going to be, and that's going to be the marquee game to start the 2025 season as well in Columbus, Ohio, with Arch Manning as a starting quarterback for Texas. So, yeah, I mean, look, it couldn't, from a recruiting perspective, it's worked out great for Texas moving to the SEC, competing for the SEC championship, signing the #1 class, getting into Georgia for the first time in the history, Jacksonville, Florida with Jamie French. Texas is doing some things they've never done in recruiting before. Ohio State now has an opportunity to come beat the Texas Longhorns in Dallas in this national semifinal in the hotbed of recruiting in the state of Texas, in DFW. So that this is an opportunity. And then for Texas, this would be a rubber stamp recruiting win here, because you've already won in the SEC. You're competing in the future with a lot of the same players. So this is a game that obviously has national championship implications, because the winner goes on and may be the favorite in the national championship game. But from a recruiting standpoint, with what's coming in the future with the game in 2025, there are major recruiting implications in this game this year, because, the one thing is, if Ohio State beats Texas, then Ryan Day can say, look, that's why Devin Sanchez, Riley Pettis, that's why we're getting those guys. That's why Jeff Okudah left the state years ago, J.K. Dobbins and all. There's something to be said in recruiting there. And for Sark, if Texas wins, I mean, look, that's winning in the Midwest again. That could be 2 times this year. Texas won at Michigan. They have a chance to beat Ohio State now, the 2 Big Ten programs in the same year. So if Texas wanted to start expanding, then they might have that opportunity. So while this is a huge game on the field, there's recruiting implications in this game, especially considering Ohio State and Texas are about to play again to start 2025.
I got to say this, too. If Texas were to win this game somehow, then they would play, obviously, either Notre Dame or Penn State, another Midwest/Near East kind of team. But my thought process on this is a little bit different, in that I feel like Texas and Ohio State are already elite recruiting programs, but this could create a pecking order of sorts in the minds of some young kids, right?
Yeah.
And that's really what I'm talking about. Hey, I want to ask you another question as it relates to this. A lot of people are saying, oh, the SEC now has been passed up by the Big Ten. Is that true in your opinion? Is there a kernel of truth to it? Perhaps there might be. And if so, why? So we're gonna flip the switch here from recruiting and talk a little bit more Big Ten versus SEC. I want to put my spin on this a little bit, if you don't mind, Jerry. I believe that there is a piece of this that has to do with quarterbacks, and almost exclusively quarterbacks. It's not the other positions. Now, Ohio State's loaded, don't get me wrong, but they're a little bit different than every other team in the Big Ten, except maybe Penn State on defense with an Abdul Carter, right, in the 2 running backs they have. The difference right now is the Big Ten has better quarterbacks than the SEC overall. When you look at Will Howard, when you look at Drew Allaire, those 2 guys kind of led that. The Rourke out of for Indiana the same way. The SEC did not have a good quarterback year this year and may not have had a great one a year ago. Jalen Milroe, not a passer, no matter what you rank him as. Is it strictly the quarterback position that's playing a role in this? Or I'm willing to be open to this, has the Big Ten kind of figured out what they want to do from a recruiting perspective and has been amping up their talent level over time and now adding in that quarterback?
Well, I think it's more so there's 3 teams in the Big Ten, Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, that have similar talent on the lines of scrimmage and now in skill as the top SEC programs. Those 3 teams could run down into the SEC and they would look like you could put Ole Miss on their jerseys or you could put Alabama or Georgia on their jerseys. And you say, that is a really good, that team looks like an SEC football team that people have been accustomed to seeing in the Nick Saban years and in the Kirby Smart years. I think that's part of it there as well. But I mean, look, Penn State and Ohio State, they recruit a lot of kids in the Southeast. And the one thing, the answer to that question for me, do they start having more success? Do they start beating Georgia on more kids? Do they start beating, because it was hard to win when Nick Saban was winning 6 national titles in a 15-year period of time in the state of Alabama, in the state of Georgia, in the South Florida. Has that been opened up now more for everybody? That's the question that I think from a recruiting perspective. From a team perspective, I'm not sure. I mean, look, LSU had Jaden Daniels last year, right? So, I mean, they had a great quarterback in the league. I think the SEC, the quarterbacks that were supposed to have great years, Quinn Ewers included, did not have the years expected. That was Jackson Dart. That was Carson Beck, and that was Quinn Ewers. Now, I think maybe there's more depth of players at that position in the SEC. But I think we're with the Big Ten, we're talking about 3 teams in general for me. Now, Oregon is a Big Ten team now, so maybe they're with Texas, right? So
USC
is a disaster right now, but Oregon counts in that as well because they have a look of an SEC level team athlete wise. So I think maybe with the addition is the addition of Oregon and USC outweigh the addition of Texas and Oklahoma long term, because either USC or Oklahoma is going to have to figure this thing out. One of those 2 teams is going to have to figure it out. I mean, so I think that's what it is in reality, because James Franklin, he's recruited the South successfully. These programs, Ohio State and Penn State, have also taken advantage of the schools into Virginia and in Virginia not being as competitive as they once were.
And Maryland.
Maryland. So they can dip down into the 757 in DC in those areas. And they're not getting good players. They're getting Chase Youngs of the world out of DC. I mean, they're getting elite talent.
Yeah, I'm thinking of this, and here Ohio State has had a good quarterback play for what feels like eons, right? I mean, whether it's C.J. Stroud or Justin Fields or Dwayne, they've had elite quarterback play. What changed recently is Michigan had J.J. McCarthy, right? Penn State now has Drew Allaire, who I think is going to be in that category of elite quarterbacks potentially, right? And that's what I'm saying. There is no Tua Tagovailoa at Alabama right now. There's no guy at Georgia right now. I mean, it's one of those things where I think maybe the Big Ten has always had that line play, and Ohio State's had a little bit of everything. They've been an outlier, I think, in fairness to them, in completely fairness to them. But Michigan and Penn State, although Michigan fell off this year, they've actually caught up now if they can get a quarterback, which obviously they did in the high school ranks. But I think that's been the piece. I don't think that the SEC is necessarily falling off. I think, to your point, with the addition of Oregon in particular, they've added another team that has that SEC look to it. And we'll see what happens, whether it's the Big Ten or the SEC. There's no doubt this year the Big Ten looks like the top conference in the country, in my opinion. They've done better in bowl games thus far. The SEC has not done poorly. The ACC is the one that looks really, really bad right now.
Right.
But my point to all of this, Jerry, is the question, where is college football headed? Some people have said that it's because of the portal or because of NIL that the Big Ten is stepping up and whatnot. Is that true in your opinion, or is that just? Who is really stepping up? Indiana stepped up because of the portal, but are they going to be there for a long period of time, in your opinion?
Well, I think that's the question I have is long term. You have Oregon, you have Ohio State, you have Michigan, you have Penn State are real players nationally in NIL.
And recruiting.
And NIL. So I think they have, with the addition of Oregon, I think Oregon's pushed some of those programs from an NIL perspective a little bit too, which I think is good for Penn State and Michigan. I think Ohio State was already there, but I think Oregon pushes those guys a little bit at the same time. So I think we're headed to two super conferences. I thought, and I don't know when it's going to happen, and you're going to have 5-6 teams that are going to continue to elevate within these conferences and be to the rise to the cream of the crop. And that doesn't, with the college football playoff, you're going to have the Indiana. You're going to have one year maybe a South Carolina gets in with Lenore.
Arizona State.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to have those teams, but I think you're going to have a top 4, 5, 6 in the Big Ten once it all shakes out, and you're going to have the same in the SEC. The question is with the conferences. This is always the question about the conferences. Is it just going to be top heavy in the Big Ten? Is it just going to be top heavy in the SEC? I think as far as the NFL draft, there's always been more depth come out of the SEC programs in the NFL draft. Depth of talent in the region, right? I think that's what we're going to have to see is, can the other Big Ten teams keep up at all? Can Minnesota keep up at all? Can Indiana keep up long term? Can Illinois had a great year? Can they keep up? I mean, or is it going to be every 3 years for some of those teams, right? And that's the thing that we're going to have to figure out, especially when we go to profit sharing.
Yeah, and I look at it, and I'm sitting here saying that the Big Ten is the Big Ten right now. I do think it's top heavy, even though Minnesota's a competitive team and Illinois competitive. USC is certainly competitive, if not winning right now, I guess would be the best way to put it. But the SEC has been more balanced outside of Alabama and Georgia, right? You have Tennessee now flexing its muscle from an NIL perspective a little bit. But when we talk about NIL, there are no two teams that are bigger in NIL than Texas and Ohio State.
Right.
They are very aggressive in the portal. They're very aggressive in the high school ranks. So what we're looking at on Friday is two teams that are as good as you can get from a talent perspective. Maybe Ohio State right now, in my opinion, probably has a little bit of an edge on the Longhorns, especially in the senior class. Because if you look at the senior class, a lot of Texas's guys are transfer in from their senior class. They're going to be drafted. Whereas Ohio State, they've been recruiting well a little bit longer. We didn't mention the 2021 recruiting class, which was Sark's transition year into Texas outside the top 10, whereas Ohio State, another top 5 ranking.
Yeah.
And so you look at that, they've been doing it better, longer, and we'll see what that means on Friday. But I do think these are two teams that are positioned to be in that elite for a long period of time, not only because of NIL, but because of history, because of where they're situated within their own conferences, et cetera. What were you going to say?
I was going to say this too. At the beginning of the year, who were the 3 teams that were talked about most? There was 4 teams really talked about most to be the national championship contenders this year. It was Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, and Oregon. So 2 of those have survived and are now playing against each other. So kudos to Sark and Ryan Day. Immense pressure on Ryan Day this year. Immense pressure on Ryan Day this year. And so he rebounded from the Michigan loss and has his team there. So these teams have both And I get it. Ohio State fans, it's national championship. Texas fans, it's national championship. But these guys have delivered. One of them is just not going to get to play for the title because we're in a 12-team playoff now and they're playing in the semifinals. But both of these teams have delivered on the preseason expectations. More so, even though Oregon went undefeated, and Georgia, even though they beat Texas twice, they're out. Now, they didn't make it. Ohio State drummed Oregon, and Georgia lost to Notre Dame. So Texas and Ohio State are, of the 4 teams that were mentioned earlier this year, the 4 best teams with the best chance to win a national championship. 2 of them are out. Now we're down to 2. Yep. That's Ohio State and Texas, and we'll see if one of those 2 takes home the crown.
Ryan Day, we were talking about this earlier this week when we talked to Mac Brown last weekend. He said one of the things about this as a coach is you want to be around the national championship rankings and be in that category year after year, and then you never know when you're going to break through, and then you finally break through. That could be Ryan Day this year. He's kind of hung around the rim a couple times, right? Now it may be his time. Sark, this is his second attempt in as many years to be in the national semifinals. You hang around the rim enough,
no doubt,
you're going to get a putback. And that I think is the best way to describe maybe what Ryan Day has done, even to some consternation of Ohio State fans of not getting over the top. Here they are 12-2. And to your point, they're favored in the national semifinals. They're the prohibitive favorite to win the national championship, according to Vegas.
Yeah.
So we'll see where that goes. All right, Jerry, Longhorns and Ohio State kick it off on Friday. We'll have more. We have a live stream coming up later tonight as well. Myself, Gerry Hamilton, and Rod Babers. Please feel free to join us, ask any questions. Also, visit us at ontexasfootball.com. That's ontexasfootball.com. Jerry, you have a good one, buddy. I know you're going to get on the road. Got a lot of recruiting stuff going on this week up in Dallas and other areas in between. For Gerry Hamilton, I'm Bobby Burton. It's been On Texas Football. Okay.